Animal stories. Now the snake was more shrewd than all the living things of the field that Yahweh God had made. It said to the woman, the snake said to the woman, that line could start a fable by Aesop. A talking animal would not have been original with Aesop. He lived, encyclopedias tell me, in the 6th century before the birth of Christ. Perhaps a contemporary of Pythagoras. The snake in Eden appears about 1,000 years earlier. Today, the animal stories we find in bookstores are mostly for children. But Aesop and Plato in the myth of Machiavelli, Jonathan Swift, they tell animal stories for grown-ups. The Garden of Eden story, I think, should be told to children, but they will not understand it until they are grown up. An animal story is a sort of parable. How we learn to read a parable, to interpret and understand one, is not very clear to me. I think it's a little like trying to understand a dream. Our dreams encode, distort, scramble the things that happen during the day, during ordinary waking life. Is reading parables a teachable art? Can just anybody do it? There's a passage in Kant's First Critique which suggests to me that he thought maybe not. And thus we find that whereas understanding is capable of being taught and equipped by rules, the power of judgment is a particular talent that cannot be taught at all, but can only be practiced. This is also the reason why the power of judgment is the specific feature of so-called mother wit, for whose lack no school can compensate. Mother wit, he says in his Anthropology, consists in possession of the universal and innate rules of the understanding. If Kant is correct, we are not all equal in mother wit. Animal stories began, I propose, when the first poet thought of an analogy, a word we get from Greek, analogos, which is translated in Euclid Book 5 as proportion. Greedy as a pig, she watched him like a hawk. He's got horse sense. She's timid as a mouse. They were busy as bees. He acted like an ass. They walked on cat's feet. Iago speaks with a forked tongue. Thersites looks like a monkey. A ruler who wants to survive in politics must be able to act in turn like a lion and a fox. Machiavelli. If horses could talk, they would tell us how simply amazed they are at the moral disorder in our families and our indiscriminate mating habits. The Bible is the oldest book in the West. Its earliest parts, chapters 1 through 11, come from sometime, perhaps 10 centuries before Homer. Genesis is its first book. What the snake and the woman say to one another is the first conversation in Genesis. It is the first conversation, biblically speaking, in human history. It has come to seem very strange to me that the holy book of two great religions, Judaism and Christianity, should present the history of mankind as having begun with a snake talking to a woman. If this is history, it's not history like Herodotus and Thucydides write. The kind of facticity that we think of as history would probably tell us that the first animal story ever told is probably not this one, but we can't really know. Never mind. The story of Eve and the serpent is the animal story that some ancient rabbi, or several of them, chose to put first in the Hebrew Bible. What that rabbi thought the story was about and what he aimed to teach by it, that's what I'm going to speculate about. By Hebrew Bible, I mean the one composed originally in that language, except I think for 2 or 3 books in Aramaic. This is the Bible of the Jews. The first half of the Bible we read in sophomore seminar. It's the older half. This means that the Garden of Eden story belonged to the ancient Israelites before Christianity appropriated it. And if, as I am surmising, the story was for a long time told and retold before the rabbis put it down in writing, as seems to have been the case also with Homer, then it belonged to bards and storytellers long before it was written down. The snake. Now the snake was more shrewd than all the living things of the field that Yahweh, God, had made. It said to the woman, the snake is not mentioned in the 6 days creation story in chapter 1. He's not mentioned in chapter 2 when Adam names the animals. He appears for the first time in the first verse of chapter 3. He seems to come out of nowhere. His origin is unknown, mysterious. Maybe snakes have always been with us. My translator, Everett Fox, whose translation I am using mostly, tells me that the Hebrew word, the root of it, the root of Eden, is cognate with the word for pleasure that Sarah uses in chapter 18 when she overhears the prophecy that she and Abraham are to have a son. Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in days. The way of women had ceased for Sarah. Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I have become worn, is there to be pleasure for me? And my Lord is old." So Eden is the pleasure place, the land of pleasure. A well-kept garden is also a place of pleasure, but a real garden is likely to harbor snakes. Eden, the first garden, has a snake in the grass. The snake said to the woman, "Even though God said, 'You're not to eat from any of the trees in the garden.'" Later in the story, God condemns the snake to walk on his belly. So here, when he speaks to the woman, he must be standing upright. In posture and the ability to speak, he is halfway a man. In shrewdness and cunning, he is a beast, a predator. His question shows his cunning. The King James translation is, "Yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden." Fox tries to get a little closer to the Hebrew. He renders it this way. The snake said to the woman, "Even though God said, 'You're not to eat from any of the trees in the garden,'" it's incomplete. This grammatical form is a rhetorical figure. It has a name, aposiopesis, which means in Greek, a becoming silent. It's what we do when we suddenly break off in the middle of a sentence because we can't continue speaking. Or, as in the case of the snake, because we don't want to say what's on our mind. We just want to hint. The snake aims to find directions out by speaking indirectly. He probes the woman's mind with insinuation. He is fishing. The story doesn't tell how the snake knows that God said anything at all to the man or to the woman about which trees are available for food. I don't think this silence matters very much, provided it doesn't affect what the story is about. Whatever his means and sources of information, the snake knows enough to catch the prey he's hunting. Hint and innuendo will set the woman's imagination going. The conversation. The snake diverts the woman's attention from the prohibition to God's motives for the prohibition. He knows she is innocent and without experience. So he touches her childlike readiness to believe what she's told. He suspects that she has an inclination to believe that what she desires is good just because she desires it. And what she does and says confirms his suspicion. The snake's art is the one Penelope's father was master of. Homer calls it the art of the oath. Sinon, in Virgil's Aeneid, he had it, and Iago and Don Giovanni. The art of ignoble rhetoric, speech intended to mislead. In Genesis 3, speech and lying come into being at the same time. The first conversation is a seduction. It's about eros. The woman said to the snake, "From the fruit of the other trees in the garden we may eat, but from the tree that is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you are not to eat from it, and you're not to touch it, lest you die." There are two trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowing of good and evil. The tree of life is in the midst of the garden. Where the other tree is, the story doesn't say. I wonder if its location is not mentioned because it doesn't matter. It could be anywhere or everywhere. Forbidden trees are fruit, maybe like snakes. Where you find one, you find the other. No garden, no place of pleasure is free of snakes. Maybe Adam and Eve would eventually find their way to it wherever it was. Eve probably would. She's more curious. She's more adventurous. Whether she wishes to adventure alone is a question. Would she always offer to share with Adam? Does her desire to share contribute to her decision to eat the fruit? Is she capable of not sharing, of keeping it for herself? Would it be good for her to be alone on her own? She confuses the trees. The prohibition specified the tree of the knowing of good and evil, but the tree she tells the snake the prohibition applies to is the tree in the midst of the garden, and that is the tree of life. Why does she mix them up? Is she really confused? If the two trees are essentially one, each implicates the other. Knowing good and evil would, on this hypothesis, be bound up with the immortality that could have been gotten from the tree of life. The woman also mentions a prohibition against touching, but God said nothing about touching. She wasn't present when the prohibition was given. She must have been told it by the man. Was she paying attention? Maybe she knows something about touch that he doesn't know. Our touch is quite sensitive. A particle of grit in the spinach or an eyelash in the soup we detect right away. A mosquito on our hair or a feather's touch on the arm. Is this the sense of touch that the woman has in mind? In The Prince, chapter 19, Machiavelli says, "Men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands, because seeing is given to everyone, touching to few. Everyone sees how you appear, few touch what you are." Judge by the hands, Machiavelli advises, not by the eyes. It's by touch that we find out what others react to or respond to. The snake said to the woman, "Die, you will not die. Rather, God knows that on the day you eat from the tree, your eyes will be opened, and you will become like gods, knowing good and evil." What the snake says is not simply wrong or false. They do not die, not, that is, on the day they eat, and their eyes are opened, and they do find themselves knowing good and evil. The snake says God knew all this beforehand, and he's not wrong. Adam lives 930 years, according to the genealogy in chapter 5. And after his first three sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth, he begat other sons and daughters. Adam lives to see the birth of his descendants to the 9th generation. Lamech, the father of Noah. Noah's great-great-grandfather is Enoch, the first man said to walk with God. Eve and Adam did not walk with God. At the end of the story, they are sent away, driven out of the garden, and it is closed permanently. Some things we can do only once. The woman saw that the tree was good for eating, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and the tree was desirable to contemplate. Her three motives are listed in a sort of ascent, from the belly to the eyes to the mind. The tree was first good for eating, then it delighted her eyes, and finally she saw it as desirable to contemplate. The Hebrew that Everett Fox renders as to contemplate, the Greek Bible, the Septuagint, translates as katanoesai. That's an aorist infinitive of a compound verb consisting of kata and noeo. Something having to do with the activity of the mind. This Greek verb may be, if my memory serves, the same verb that Aristophanes uses in scene 3 of the Clouds, when he has Socrates say, "I tread on air and contemplate the sun." Socrates looks down on the gods from above. If this is the sense of the woman's thought, desirable to contemplate could imply prideful ambition. I wonder if the verb's range of meanings could include a sense quite different. The way a mother looks down on the face of her nursing firstborn. That look includes awe and wonder, perhaps even gratitude and reverence. It might be a way of looking up by looking down. God has stocked the garden with every type of tree desirable to look at and good for food. Whether he contemplates that mankind will have a desire to contemplate, the story does not say. It may be that there is no room in the garden for philosophic contemplation of the kind we associate with Plato. The immediate need this verse deals with is ensuring that what's attractive is also edible, nutritive, and what's good for food is also attractive. As a place of pleasure, a garden must have no beautiful plants that are poisonous or dangerous, like the one we call Venus's flytrap. God puts beauty first, nutrition second. But the woman inverts this order. For God, the beautiful has some sort of primacy in his plan for mankind. But the woman's first motive, not her only motive, but her first motive, what urges her primarily is food, an appetite that she and the man share with animals. Whether the animals are capable of desiring what is beautiful for its own sake, that's a question. She took from its fruit and ate and gave also to her husband beside her, and he ate. She took, she ate, she gave. He ate is the whole sum of what the man does. The woman is very much in charge here. The man is mousy. He acts like a scared rabbit. He does not speak. He does not question. He hardly seems even to choose what he does in any responsible way. He just takes what he's offered. Was he supposed to guard the woman as God charged him to watch over the garden? If so, he fails. The story does not report any conversation between the man and the woman. If there was conversation, it was without words. Maybe they spoke with their eyes or touched with their looks. Shame. The eyes of the two of them were opened, and they knew then that they were nude. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. King James, aprons. What their eyes are opened to is that they are nude. How is it, knowing good and evil, to see their nudity? Is nudity evil? What they cover, moved by shame, is their organs of generation. Shame, in the biblical account, enters the world, comes into our experience when the generative parts of the body, the private parts, are for the first time seen to need concealment. Their nudity was not always shameful. Now, the two of them, the human and his wife, were nude, yet they were not ashamed. This is the last verse of chapter 2. Right before the snake appears out of nowhere in the first verse of chapter 3. Before they ate the forbidden fruit, the man and the woman did not see their organs of generation as shameful, even though they were visible. Nudity may not be inherently shameful. A year-old boy and girl playing on the seashore without any clothes on would not feel shame. They probably wouldn't pay much attention at all to their differences. Of course, this will change in the second and third decades of life. That is when we become involuntarily capable of generation. We start noticing the other. We start seeking a mate, a partner, a friend for the long term. Even the nudity incident to the act of generation may not be itself shameful. The divine command, be fruitful and multiply, cannot be understood to require a shameful act. Genesis 26. And Isaac dwelt in Gerar, and the men of the place asked him of his wife, Rebekah, and he said, "She is my sister." For he feared to say, "She is my wife," lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah, his wife. And Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, of a surety she is thy wife, and how saidst thou, she is my sister?" It is not respectful to sport with your wife in public. If the act of generation can be without shame, then what Adam and Eve did must have been somehow not compliant with the command of fruitfulness. Perhaps they should have asked permission. Not having permission, they were not, in all respects, ready to do what they did, or the way in which they were ready was not the only way in which they should have made themselves ready. Now they heard the sound of Yahweh, God, who was walking about in the garden in the breezy time of the day. And the human and his wife hid themselves from the face of Yahweh, God, amid the trees of the garden. Yahweh, God, called to the human and said to him, "Where are you?" He said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I am nude." They not only cover their organs of generation, they also try to hide their whole body. They don't understand that God can see everything, can see what they are trying to hide, both their private parts and their public parts. Our public parts are our faces and our bodies. That is, our posture, the way we hold ourselves. The snake must forever hold himself on his belly. Darwin, in a book titled The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals, presents persuasive evidence and arguments that there is a posture which signifies shame. And he says, I think he's correct, we blush only on skin that is exposed. We don't blush under our clothes. That the man and the woman try to hide what cannot be hidden reveals them as not knowing where they are. They think or wish they were hidden. They do not understand that what they have done cannot be hidden. Does knowing good and evil consist in finding out that because of something we have done, we have no place to hide? Our private selves are utterly exposed. We are naked to the world. God asks, "Where are you?" And the man answers, "I heard you, I was afraid, I hid myself." His shame shows in his effort to cover up. Covering up or hiding is impelled by fear of being seen, the fear that another will see what we wish to keep out of sight. Who told you that you were nude? From the tree about which I command you not to eat, have you eaten? No one told the man he was nude. He saw this for himself after eating the fruit. They knew then that they were naked. They knew then means, I think, they realized. What they realized was that by their disobedience, they themselves had infected incurably with shame their first conjugal coupling, which might otherwise have been joyful if they had waited to be ready in every respect to do what they did. God asked, "Have you eaten from the forbidden tree?" The man answers, "The woman you gave to me, she gave me from the tree, and so I ate." This answer exposes, uncovers how he was not ready to do what he did. He is not ready to accept responsibility. He acts like a child. The command was given to him, not to the woman. As the intermediary between God and the woman, he should have accurately and forcefully conveyed the terms of the prohibition and guarded each of them from violating it. He did nothing. He neglected his duty. Tempted, he wilted. Now he evades his responsibility by blaming the woman. The woman. The man comes into the world, and the woman then comes into his life in chapter 2. Yahweh, God, formed the human of dust from the soil. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living being. In the King James translation, man became a living soul. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation, man becomes a living, animate psyche, soul, Greek. In English, psyche, psychology, the logos of the soul. God places the man in the garden to work it and to watch it, and gives him this command: from every other tree of the garden you may eat. Yes, eat. But from the tree of the knowing of good and evil, you are not to eat from it, for on the day that you eat from it, you must die. Yes, die. Immediately after giving this command, God says, "It is not good for the human to be alone. I will make him a helper corresponding to him." In the King James translation, I will make him a help meet for him. Meet, M-E-E-T. Here means fit in the sense of apt or proper or suitable. Other translations, helper fit for him, Revised Standard. Fitting helper, the Tanakh, published by the Jewish Publication Society, or partner, the New English Bible. What God means when he says it's not good that the man should be alone, the story does not say, nor does the story say what God means by not good. In the 6 days creation story in chapter 1, 5 things are called good. The separation of dry land and seas in verse 10. I think I overlooked light in verse 4. The ruling of day and night by the sun and moon, which separate daylight and darkness. The swarming of the waters with fish and the air with birds. And the herd animals and wildlife and crawling things. In summary, we might say the good things are separation and ruling and fertility and fecundity, multiplying. One thing is said to be exceedingly good. This occurs on the sixth day as God saw all that he had made. The parts are good, but the created and well-arranged whole of them is very good, goodest of all. Mankind, humankind, in the Fox translation I'm usually quoting, is not said to be good. What does this silence suggest? I propose it suggests that it's an open question in the beginning whether man is good or good without qualification. In Eden, it's too early to tell until the snake comes. Man hasn't yet done anything except listen to God's command. And we know from what happens later that he didn't understand it fully. If he had, he would not have disobeyed. And he would have restrained his wife from doing so for her own good. In Genesis, man's work is to rule. God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the heavens, animals, all the earth, and all crawling things that crawl about upon the earth." God knows that male without female, man without woman, cannot comply with the command he has given to both animals and human beings: bear fruit and be many, or, King James, be fruitful and multiply. Heterosexual pairing as the means of procreating offspring is taken for granted as the natural pattern. Not good for the man to be without a woman seems to mean, at the very least, neither one of them alone can be fruitful. Both human beings and animals generate offspring. But in chapter 1, only man is a ruler. Animals are ruled. Mankind, is to have dominion not only over the animals, but also the whole earth. If our proper work is to rule the animals and all the earth, it is not good that any of us should live alone, individually, in isolation. We are meant to be not only social, which some animals also are, but political animals, to live under rule. A man living in isolation can live only the life of a brute. And brutes rule by violence, not speech. Rule is the defining activity of political life. And we begin to learn it in the family, where, according to Genesis, the man is to rule the woman. What qualifies the man for this rule, how he is to exercise the power, the story does not spell out. Adam fails the test, but so does Eve. God asked her, "What is this you have done?" And she says, "The snake enticed me, and so I ate." She too is not ready to accept moral responsibility for the consequences of her choices. Man alone is not good, neither are man and woman together. There's more, much, much more to examine in the Eden story. But I would like to change and enlarge our perspective. So I'm going to make a jump and begin again in a new place. In the Bible we read in seminar, the second half, composed in Greek, begins with a genealogy. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. In this way, the Hebrew and Greek halves of the Bible are joined. Abraham, whose story begins in Genesis chapter 12, is here said to be the ancestor of Christianity's eponym, the man called the Christ, the anointed one, Messiah, the Son of God. Back in Genesis, a genealogy in chapter 5 joins Adam to Noah. Another one, there are half a dozen of them in Genesis. Another one in chapter 11 joins Noah's son, Shem, ancestor of the Semites, to Abram, later renamed Abraham. Thus, the genealogy that begins the Gospel of Matthew, the first book of the Greek Bible, extends the genealogies in Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew Bible. All parts of the whole are connected. All parts. Two stories about David, ancient Israel's greatest king, shed light, I think, when we put them together on Genesis 3. They are the stories of Goliath, David and Goliath, and David and Bathsheba. The first, David is a young man. In the second, an aging king. Together, these two stories raise a question about the connection between spiritedness and eros. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, David affirms his readiness to face the Philistine giant Goliath without any armor and only his own weapon, a slingshot. He's a mere stripling youth. He has no experience of war. He tells King Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him." Keep in mind what David said about guarding a lamb. Years later, David is himself king. And it came to pass, 2 Samuel chapter 11, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David tarried at Jerusalem. And in an evening tide, he arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself. And the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and took her. David is not where a warrior king belongs. He is not with his army. He is in the wrong place. If God had said to him, David, where are you? What would he have said? In consequence of being in the wrong place, he sees a woman who is uncovered, something he should not have seen and would not have seen if he had been where he belonged. But he is growing old. He tries to solace his fear of death by taking something beautiful that does not belong to him. The woman was beautiful, and David took her. Echoes Genesis chapter 6, which comes after the Garden of Eden story and right before the story of Noah and the flood. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Saw they were fair, and took them. David orders Bathsheba's husband, Uriah the Hittite, put in the front lines of battle where he is killed. Nathan the prophet tells David a parable. In the same city there lived a rich man with exceeding many flocks and herds, and a poor man who had nothing save one little ewe lamb, which he had brought up and nourished with his children, that was unto him as a daughter. To provide a hospitable meal for a passing stranger, the rich man takes the poor man's lamb. Hearing this story, David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, As the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, Thou art the man. David sees the injustice, but he doesn't see who did it. He does not see himself in the story. He does not know how to hear a parable. Is what he lacks Kant's mother wit? He sees the universal. The rich man did wrong. But he does not have the rule that shows how the particular fits under the universal or within it. He is the particular. The rich man and David are analogous. But David does not see the proportions between the parable and his own conduct. King David may be like us. I remember this experience. When we read the Meno and don't see how we are stuck in the mud of our own unexamined opinions. Or when we can see and draw on the blackboard with ease the shapes in Euclid, but we can't see the ones in the sky unless we go to the planetarium or YouTube. Now, let us be fair. It is simply true, and we all know it, that some of us cannot rotate three-dimensional shapes in our minds, and we're never going to be able to. Mother wit is not equally distributed. So, we do the best we can with what we have, and we may discover that the best way to do the best we can with what we have is to help others. Reading parables. The Bible is the oldest book in the West. As I've mentioned, its oldest parts come from a time long before Homer and Plato, partly because it's so old, learning how to read it is a problem. There's not enough seminar time for us to read all of it. We don't read in particular the last book. This, in my King James study edition, is titled The Revelation to John. We could, though, if we took a mind to, I did recently, page through it, the last book, the same way we might page through the whole of Euclid's Elements or The Sense of Music. We can use study aids, table of contents, index, concordances, if our text has these. Yes, I do know about Google. Paging through Revelation, I found this. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. I think that overcometh means resist the snake. Revelation refers back to Genesis, the last book to the first book, the end to the beginning. An intense meditation on Alpha leads to Omega. As in Genesis, there are animal stories. For example, in chapter 2, Revelation, the story of Balaam's ass is recalled. Balaam's ass is another talking animal. The original story is told in the book of Numbers, chapter 21. The ass justly reproaches a wrong by his master in the fashion of Nathan's parable to King David. Unlike the snake who seduces someone to do wrong. If you act like an ass, act like Balaam's ass. Revelation reports a vision that John, its author, had. The vision includes 4 horses. The rider of the white one holds a bow and a crown. The rider of the red one has the power to take peace from the earth. The rider of the black horse holds a pair of balances. The rider of the pale horse has the power to kill with sword and with hunger and with death. You see, the 4 horses are 2 pairs, white and black, red and pale. Pale horse kills, red destroys peace. The black and white build, they make to grow. The pair of balances are the scales of justice. Bow and crown are kingly rule, political power, rightly exercised. Which pair of riders will prevail in the world? Which are prevailing right now in our world? Which are prevailing in us, in our own souls? Looking inward, do we behold stable equilibrium or conflict? If we are at war with ourselves, how much of the fight involves food and sex? Socrates' lie in the soul, I wonder, may refer to a struggle already recognized long before him by the ancient rabbis, and before them by the storyteller whose tale or parable they preserved in Genesis 3. An animal story, I've said several times, is a sort of parable. The parable is Jesus' characteristic mode of speech. All these things spake Jesus unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. Jesus is drawing on Psalm 78. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children. These verses echo another text in the Hebrew Bible from its so-called wisdom books. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Proverbs, first chapter. Eve may have desired wisdom, but she did not seek instruction. If she had, her grandmother might have offered some cautionary advice. Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, is not the theology, not of the kind anyway, that the Garden of Eden story has been buried under. It's the book of practical wisdom, common sense, morals, right conduct in the affairs of ordinary life, the distillate of sayings and stories that mothers and fathers, grandfathers and grandmothers tell their children and their children's children. A cat that jumps on a hot stove won't do it again. It won't even jump on a coal stove. Riddle. By tradition, the book of Psalms is attributed to David, ancient Israel's greatest king, and the book of Proverbs to Solomon, his son by Bathsheba. Solomon rules ancient Israel at the height of its glory, power, and expanse, right before it began to decline and eventually disappear, destroyed by the Assyrians, the people scattered for 2,000 years until their return to Palestine in 1948, when modern Israel was established. On the record given in the Bible, David and Solomon were Israel's most erotic rulers. They are joined as father and son through Bathsheba, she who was very beautiful to look upon, whom David saw uncovered because he was in a place where he should not have been. I wonder whether the powerful erotic natures of these two great rulers contributed more to building Israel up or more to its falling apart. In Lincoln's 1827 speech, The Perpetuation of Our Political Institutions, he identifies as the most likely threat to the long-term stability and prosperity of the then still new United States, the men of the tribe of the lion and the eagle. These restless men, today we can see women like them, are always busy doing something. They don't care whether they build or destroy, as long as they're bustling around, hungry to be looked at, admired for their dynamism and potency. Solomon, the love child sprung from David's adultery, is reported to have exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. But to build his palace, he expends his riches over 13 years. And it takes only 7 to build the temple. If my reading of the measurements is correct, the temple is smaller than the palace. His famous wisdom is exemplified in the unforgettable story where he commands a baby to be divided between the 2 harlots who each claim to be its mother. He seems to know something about what mothers love most, but he has been wildly indiscriminate in his mating and in making mothers. Just 8 chapters later, we read that he loved many strange women, that means non-Israelite women, clave to them in love, and had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. In his dotage, Solomon becomes like his father. Both of them lose sight of God's providence and care for them, and they seek solace in beautiful young bodies, trying to hide from themselves their fear of death. The weaknesses that go with growing old expose one face of Eros, the bestial, predatory face. Solomon and David forget the first cause of their power and riches. They forget what's implicit in the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. They forget what Plato calls heavenly Aphrodite, what the Bible calls or implies should be named the sacramental face of eros. This used to be called procreation. Procreation happens in front of God's face. It's an imitation of his creative activity in chapter 1. Although private, it is not shameful. It does not need to be covered up. Adam and Eve were not ready for procreation, for birth, generation, family. In Genesis 3, Eve is the woman's third and final name. The Hebrew, ha'ava, I'm told by Fox, means life giver. Eden, the pleasure place, is the place for giving life. The damning and conclusive evidence of their unreadiness is their first child, Cain, the brother killer and founder of cities. But that's another story. Let's take a break and then talk to one another.